Commandments. And probably because I can see the end in sight, my mind went in a direction that might actually slow us down, and maybe we don't get through today's lesson. So it might go an extra week. But I want to ask you a question after we do the review. So what is the first command? Yep, go ahead and just either do the hand motion or say it out loud so I can hear it. Again, I don't want to embarrass you by the hand motions. I find them helpful for remembering. So you you are sensible people. Alistair Begg always says that when he wants to quit making an argument and move on, he's like, well, you are sensible people. You can study this for yourself. So you are sensible people. I know that, but however, what is the third command? Good. Second command? Good. Seventh command? Yes. Fourth command? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Fifth command, you shall honor your father and mother. Sixth command, you shall not murder. Eighth command, you shall not steal. And that brings us to the ninth command, you shall not bear false witness. And you just get all those fingers over your mouth. You've got them almost all up. You get it right on your mouth so that you're not going to bear false witness. And we will talk to some degree about that today. But the only other command that goes beyond this is you shall not covet. So you get all 10 and you just start grabbing with them. You shall not covet. And interestingly enough, when we get to that, we're going to find that brings us right back to the beginning, because the New Testament tells us that covetousness is idolatry. And you shall have no other gods before God. So it's bringing us around. And when I thought of that statement, it made me ask the question, why did God choose these 10 commands? Think about that for a moment, and let's ask an easier question. Should there have been other commands that were included with these 10? Or should there be other commands that replace these 10, some of these 10? And of course, as Christians and Bible believers, we go, well, I'm only saying yes because there are other commands that are given to clarify these, but as far as these basic commands, we can say no. I mean, Jesus can simplify it down to 2 commands that cover the 10 commands, so you could say it that way, but the 2 commands are still talking about the 10 commands, and when you add in the 600 commands that clarify the 10 commands, you still have the 10 commands. They are just clarifying the 10 commands. And so these 10 commands, should there be others? Are any of them irrelevant today? By the way, when you ask that question on the internet, you get some interesting responses. One of them, I think most Christians would actually kind of agree with. Are there any of them that are irrelevant from a Christian perspective? Tom? Correct. There are ceremonial ones in the Old Testament. How about it among these 10? Emily, did you want to? Okay. Right? Sure. Okay, so those are the ceremonial ones, feasts. Do any of these commands get lumped in some ways with those ceremonial commands that we're not really going to do right now? Colossians talks about and new moons and Sabbaths. What day of the week are we here? Which is the first? Oh, the first day of the week. What is the Sabbath? The 7th day of the week. Yeah, so we are not gathering on the 7th day of the week. We're gathering on the first day of the week. And we had to talk about that. Many Christians will say, look, the Sabbath is no longer applicable to Christians. And from there, pretty much set aside the whole 10 Commandments anyway. In fact, I read someone who at least was claiming to be a Christian writer. I don't know him well enough to know how well that would hold up, and I suspect that probably he's not in the truest sense, but he was talking about what a strange and shocking thing it was for him that Louisiana passed the law about putting 10 Commandments in the school classrooms and making children actually read them, because not even Christians hold to them, especially the command about the Sabbath day. And from there, set all of it aside because Christ fulfilled it. And so we shouldn't even be having these. And so you get that sort of a mindset. I saw others respond and say, well, the first three commands are certainly not applicable to the majority of the world. Can you imagine why the first three commands would not be applicable to the majority of the world? They're not Judeo-Christian. So they don't believe in the Yahweh God of the Old Testament. They don't believe that you can't worship using idols. And taking God's name in vain, the name of Yahweh, the covenant name of the God of Israel, has no bearing on them. And because they don't believe it, therefore it's not applicable to them. And so they believe it's not applicable, which of course we would argue with, and I'll come back to that. But look how the commands are actually worded in Exodus 20, and see if you can come up with one other one that would be strongly questioned by people today, how applicable it is. And since I made the question a little vague, that gives you room to have answers that I'm not looking for, that I will not say, you got it, but could still be true. What might people question based on the wording of the commands? In fact, while you're doing that, I'll just say that in one of the articles that I read, the author, who was not a Christian, said, I wonder how many Christians have actually read through it the way that it is recorded in Scripture and whether they would believe it if they did. Tom? Okay. Yeah. So they tend to reword it and reorder the Ten Commandments where the "you shall not make any graven images" that isn't that isn't a separate command. Instead, they count them differently so that there isn't the emphasis on that. But sure, good, okay. So I can see that. What about verse 17? Obviously, that isn't this week's command, so we're not there yet. But you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Anything bother you about that verse, Tom? Yep. It is a slave. It is talking about a slave. And so that would rub people the wrong way because it's talking about slaves. And that rubs them the wrong way. Is there anything else about verse 17 that might also rub them the wrong way? Tom? Okay. That might be part of it. Definitely, it is against the American dream, and we do have to bring the American dream into line with this verse. But notice the wife. It's as if she's treated just as part of the property of the man's possessions. You've got his wife and his donkey and his house. Are all these things like the others? Just one of his possessions? Americans are going to have a problem with that wording. And so they would want to throw that command out as well, at least the way that it's stated, that it's no longer relevant for today. Now, maybe we can come back to that and talk about it in the future, but I just wanted to point these things out because people look at it and they're like, that's irrelevant. And having such a problem with the relevancy of it, it does make me circle back to my original command or question, why these 10 commands? And there does have bearing on the discussion of the ninth command. I mean, so this is actually going somewhere. It's not just that I see light at the end of the tunnel and wasn't planning on having a lesson to wrap everything up. And so I'm doing what I'm not going to do later. No, it's not just that. There is relevance to the ninth command in asking the question. So why these 10 commands? What are they intended to do? Sandy? Okay, guideline, yes. definitely, and that is going in the direction I want to go, but guideline for what? Rihanna? Good. Yep. Sure. Okay. It is about the heart. Excellent. Good. Sure. Good. And you're definitely right, but let's take it a little farther because why didn't God just give those two commands then? Two tables of stone, probably not the way that we typically think of it, that on one table has to do with our relationship with God and on the other table our relationship with people. That's probably not actually what it was. When they would make covenants in old times, they would put exactly the same on both tables, and one would be given to one party, one would be given to the other party. So they, it's probably they were identical, but let's imagine that there were two tables, and one of them had to do with our relationship with God. So on that one, it says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." And on the other one, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Why didn't he just give us two? Why did he give us 10? So they are guardrails, and it is about our heart more than the action. So we never want to get into a legalism where we think that if we're fulfilling the letter of the law, which even that's not possible, but even if we were to keep all the letters in the law, we could still get it wrong because of our hearts. That's all true, and it's all part of guidelines. But why these 10? What are they doing? Yeah, right. Mm. Yeah, yes, yes. Good. And I'm going to take it. Actually, let's give John a real quick. And you're right. Yeah, good. And they definitely do that. Let me suggest something else. And you can, well, that's Josh. And why do we spend all this time doing it? But I don't think you're going to. So as as you're just looking at life, there are many important questions coming at us. Most important question that anyone has to answer in any society and the foundation for any worldview is who am I and where am I going? And until you begin to answer that question, who am I and where am I going, you don't have a worldview. And in the first command, you have the building block of a worldview. The first command, "You shall have no other gods before me," establishes the relative place of everything in creation. You are not God. You are going to answer to God because there is one God. And so it is the foundation point for all of your existence is there is one God and you will worship him. It gives you a purpose for your life and it begins to establish what is a huge sphere of every life, and that is worship. Everyone is a worshiper. God has designed people to be worshipers, and they will worship something. The statement is actually written into my notes for the morning service instead of this one, but I believe it was Tolstoy who said, When men cease to worship God, they don't worship nothing. They begin to worship everything or anything. Because we are worshipers, we will worship. And so this is the foundation for a worldview. This is the foundation for all of creation. And that is, there is one God and you're not it. Building on that and staying in the context of your religion, you have the second command, you shall not make any graven images. And this indicates for us the proper use of religious aids. Now, there are always tools that are necessary in worshiping God. What are some tools that we have at Lakeshore Baptist Church for helping us to worship God? Let me just throw this out real quick. What are some tools that we use? Micah? Yeah, okay, yeah. Our instruments, the guitar and the piano. What else? Microphones, yep. What else? We have the internet, good. What else? Our voices, what else? The room itself, the chair that we're sitting on, the decorations that we put on the walls. We have our Bibles. We have all sorts of. We have a globe that's telling us things. The pictures that we put up, the belief statements, the place of the flag in the room. All of these are indicating to us something about our worship of God. They're all tools that help us, and there are more beyond. Well, is there anything particularly special about them? Oftentimes people will refer to this as the sanctuary, the holy place. And for that reason, as a kid, it was frowned on when I would go crawling the whole length of the sanctuary under the pews. That was not supposed to be done because it was a holy place. We weren't supposed to be running in and out of the pews. Now here, our common space and our auditorium area, it all kind of mingles. But this is a tool. Now, there is an appropriate honor that we give to places that are set aside and designated for worship because that tells us something. However, the fact that you will not make any graven images to bow down to means the holiness of them isn't because of them. And that became a problem for the Israelites, as we talked about later on, where they began to think that the ark was so special. In fact, I just read a novel that was written post 9/11 about the Jewish mindset. It's an end times one where they're trying to fit biblical prophecies in as though it was taking place in real time, and some of the people experiencing it don't know about the prophecies, but it's trying to have a normal feel to it. But the ark is rediscovered, and so Israel is then saying, well, we like our chances against the world because we've got the ark, the powerful weapon that God uses to defeat all of his people. And that was the mindset presented in the book. Well, the second command says, no, it's just a tool. Now, God did orchestrate the building of furniture, including cherubim and fruit and various kind of animals to be used as tools, to convey spiritual ideas. But it wasn't the tools that were important. It was the God who instituted the tools, so that when David was desperately in need of food and he comes waltzing through and he's like, well, you got any food? And they're like, well, we have the showbread that was just out on the table. We took it off and the priests are supposed to eat it, but you know what? Now that it's not on the table, I suppose there's nothing really sacred about that. Go ahead and take that. Now, the common people were not typically supposed to, and certainly when it was being used as worship, he wasn't supposed to touch it, but Jesus even confirmed later that it was appropriate for David to have that bread in a time of need, because there was nothing special about the bread. These rules help us to view, okay, so what is our religious worship about? Similarly, the third command, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. What is that talking about? Well, it's talking about keeping God's value in our thoughts. The problem with people not taking God's name in vain is not what people typically associate with it. And by the way, this one is also not liked. I've heard lots of people talking about this as though God is just this thin-skinned super being somewhere who can't bear to hear teasing like anybody would hear in the common workplace. He's just so thin-skinned that he hears one person say something derogatory against him and he's just got to blast them because he has no self-control and he's too pampered in his own mind. That's the implication that they get. That's not at all what this command is driving at. Rather, when people say, well, I didn't mean anything by it, I was just throwing it out. That's exactly the point. You were supposed to mean something by it. You were supposed to mean the ultimate by it, because this is the ultimate reference point in all of creation. And so whenever you use God's name, you're supposed to mean something by it, so that even when a new believer is trying to learn to pray in public, we extend some grace to them, but they're sitting, and Lord Jesus, we just thank you, Lord, that we are here today, Lord, and we just, Lord, want to make sure that everybody, Father, knows that, I mean, they're trying to learn to pray, but in throwing all those extra Lords and Jesus and Fathers and everything into the prayer, they are taking a high and valuable term and bringing it down to the point of next to nothing. And as you're out there listening to them trying to pray, and you're praying along with them, they would be better off saying instead of saying Lord so often, because this is the highest term. And so it's protecting. Do you notice how each one of these commands are protecting something? And I'm taking longer than I need to for this, but remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This is doing more than just worship. This is beginning to cross the sacred secular divide in our thinking. What is this doing? So I'm going to say that this is setting a precedent for some other significant part of life other than worship. What else is it touching on, Micah? All right, so partly it reminds us of the fact that, once again, that we are creatures and not the creator. He who guards Israel does not slumber or sleep, but we sure better. He gives his beloved sleep, and we need to make use of that. And so it reminds us that we are creatures and not the creator, but it does something else for us as well. Rihanna? Yes. It's a day that we set apart to worship God, so it keeps first things first. It keeps God in his place of prominence. Have any of you tried to do a staycation where you just stay at home and you rest from all of your labors at home? How well does that work for you? Now, some people can do it. You know what most people do? Overwhelm themselves with all their usual mundane activities that they have to do to survive, because they are still in their workspace. And they still see all the projects that they hadn't been getting to, and all the laundry that still needs to be done, and all the counters that still need to clean. And, since I'm not doing this other stuff, why don't I get to some of that dusting that I never got to? And it doesn't keep first things. I mean, it doesn't allow them to come apart and be something else. It doesn't allow them the refreshment that they would otherwise get. Now, you can do staycations if you want. No problem with that. Go for it if you want. But it illustrates the point. If every day is just like every other day, and we just pile church activities into our typical routines, then the church activities get overwhelmed by the other routines. And our ability to focus on God and to truly meet with him, that goes away. And so the Sabbath day does two things for us. Number one, it sets a foundation for work as apart from worship, and it puts some parameters on that. You will work for 6 days. You will rest for one. And you keep that in mind, and your whole work week changes knowing this is coming, and it's set apart from my usual activities. So it gives you physical rest, reminding you that you're the creature, not the creator, but also it lays a foundation for work. Put that off to the side, because we're going to get back to that in a little bit. Number 5, it begins to establish the role of human authorities, especially the family. Honor your father and mother. But all authority, all human authority, stems from that first one that you come to know. As a baby, your parents are the first authorities that you interact with. No babies are either sitting around worried about President Trump or happy about President Trump. They could not care less about President Trump at all. They do have some thoughts about these two large humans that are in their lives who are dictating their daily existence. And they believe that they have a sovereign will of their lives, and it's a good and pleasant will that they will bestow on their parents so that the parents can serve them in these things. But the children are only interested in their parents at first. And then as they grow up, they begin to establish relationships with other authorities, teachers, eventually police officers and bosses and other evil sounding things like that. They begin to establish relationships with all of them. But initially, it's the parents. And so the parents are the foundation for all authority, all social interaction, but also it begins to set aside the basis for the family. And so extending from that, there is the protection of human life. Now, this human life that came into the world through those parents, what do you do with that human life? How many times have we heard jokes that dads say, I brought you into this world and I can take you out, right? And the sixth commandment says absolutely not. I mean, you can say it if you want, although best not to say it, because the fact is you can't follow through on it, not in being your rights, because that life does not belong to you. That life belongs to the God who gave it. And in limiting parental rights, it also lays the foundation for another role of society. Remember when the command was given protecting human life? If anyone kills another individual, by man they shall be killed. That's the institution of human government. So we're beginning to see work, family, human government. These are all being controlled by the Ten Commandments, and you can see that. So you've got your religion, your work, your government, your family. This is a lot of your existence that is all being tied up into these commands. And then he begins to parse it out a little bit. Within the family, let's break it down. We've already talked about the parent-child relationship. But what is a family anyway? And it defines what a family is and what the guardrails on it. So the seventh command safeguards the family unit. If the sixth command protects human life, the seventh command safeguards the family unit. It establishes guardrails for the blessing of human sexuality. There's great freedom on the highway. Stay on the road, and you can move smoothly and freely. And boy, I've been thinking about that. I would not say that the roads in our county are great. In fact, it was sort of a joke around the post office a while ago. A guy who has a really bad back was like, yeah, the roads are so wonderful at this time of year. And the postmaster laughed and said, yeah, if you're sitting still. Otherwise, the roads aren't that great. But even with the potholes that we have, some of which are pretty extreme right now while the county is getting to them, they're pretty extreme. But still, I can move very freely and easily around the county as long as I stay on the road. When I start expanding the parameters of the road, as sometimes I do when I'm distracted, and I find myself heading down into a ditch, I correct that, because once I get in the ditch and once I get beyond the ditch into the field, how's my freedom to move about going to be? Not so good, right? Well, that's with human sexuality as well. Great freedom on the road, great pain and great bondage once you get off the road. And that's what this is establishing for us here. Number 8, you shall not steal. Now this promotes the blessing of personal property. Remember when we said that the fourth command is instituting the idea of human work? Well, is there supposed to be any benefit to that work? Yeah, there is. God's going to meet your needs, and he's going to give you blessings beyond that. Well, the 8th command develops that by promoting the blessing of personal property. Number 9, and this is where I say that this is all heading in a direction. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. This upholds justice. So if the 6th commandment is the foundation for human government based on Genesis 9:6, you shall not murder. Well, the you shall not bear false witness develops that because it is specifically a command that deals with the courtroom. If you ever find yourself in a defendant's chair in the courtroom, what do you sure hope about the witnesses and the judge? That they believe the 9th commandment. That you shall neither bear nor hear false witness. That there be justice. So this develops the idea of the courtroom. And then number 10, you shall not covet. And I've already mentioned that when we study that, we're going to find that it goes full circle back to the beginning. Because if you are coveting anything that God has not given you, you are saying God is not good. He has not given me what I truly need. And therefore, you are setting your opinion of life over against and above God's opinion of life. Hence, you have become God for yourself, and you are desiring to do things better, which is the original sin in the Garden of Eden when they listened to Satan's lies, coveted something God had not given them, and became their own gods. So it brings it full circle. And so all of these set the parameters for society. So to summarize very quickly what we have just said here, if I can find in my notes where I put it. I did summarize it. Where did I put it? Oh, there it is. So in these commands, we have the foundation for religion, for family, for government, for work, for personal property, and for contentment, which is one of the covers to the book. That pretty much includes all of human existence. It was difficult for me to think of anything outside of this that affects our regular life. I think this pretty much covers every experience that you're going to have this week and today within these. But this 9th commandment, which we don't really have time to unpack now after I did that, it plays a significant role in developing one of these core aspects. What about government? When we go to the polls later this year, who are we looking to elect into office? People who hold the 9th commandment closely. When we voted on the state Supreme Court, hopefully you were thinking 9th commandment in looking for the person that you were going to vote into office on the state Supreme Court and across the board. The 9th commandment plays prominently in anything that happens in the courtroom. But by extension, it also plays prominently in anything that we say and do. And let me just give you one, for instance, for the see and do. But I'll explain the logic here. The 7th commandment, you shall not commit adultery. How did Jesus elaborate on that? Anybody remember? I mean, it's already kind of been said, but how did Jesus elaborate on that and allow you to know whether or not you've committed adultery? Don't lust. And again, in one of the articles that I read, they said that would be proof positive that the laws are out, the 10 Commandments are outdated and shouldn't be used, because everyone who makes laws know you should never make a law and a punishment for a law that people can't keep. And so it's outdated. But the point is, we have a holy God here, and we need to understand what it is. So if just having lust is committing adultery, and actually committing adultery is adultery, I've had people say, then why not commit adultery? So why not commit adultery if as soon as you have the lust, it's in God's eyes as if you've done it? Why not go ahead and do it? How would you answer that? Or if having hatred towards someone is the same. John? Sure. And which one has greater consequences? The thinking about it or the doing? The doing, right? There are greater consequences. Is it the same sin in essence? Yes, it is, but there are greater consequences and greater harm by actually doing it than there are in just thinking about it. Well, there's an application to this. It's still a sin of the heart before it's a sin in action, but there are also two different levels. There's what you do in the courtroom that could get somebody locked away for life or even take their life. Many of the laws in the Old Testament, if you lie about them in court, they're ending up dead before the end of the day. And so when you lie about them, you are in essence also violating the 6th command, you shall not murder. We'll probably look at an illustration for that when we come back and revisit this next week. But that was the consequence. Sometimes they would just lose stuff. Usually they would lose their life. And you had to understand that. But then there's the other where you lie in other ways which are not so harmful, and you are still taking something from them. And so there is the full-on breaking of the law, which is lying in the court, but then there's any lie that we listen to or give on our own in any other part of life, and that's also included in this. Part of that is rushing to jump to conclusion based on too few facts. So let me throw one at you real quick, just a for instance here. There was an event that happened last night. You probably have heard about it. We all know who did it, right? We all know who did it, where, with what, right? Or those of you that may be looking at me, actually, I don't know if Josie's heard yet. There was an attack, probably on the president last night, in the same building where President Reagan was shot 40 years ago, interestingly enough. And he was stopped before he got close to the president. One security officer was shot, but thankfully the bulletproof vest was good enough that even being shot from close range, he was not injured. The the perpetrator, surprisingly, was not killed. I don't understand how he was not killed, but he was not killed, and didn't even seem to have any bullet holes in him, which was interesting for as much lead was flying. All that to say, we know who did it, right? I've seen the picture of him. Do we know who did it? Well, if the articles are doing their job, they will say the alleged shooter or something like that. That sometimes seems like it's far-fetched because here in the United States, we've all watched the surveillance video by now, and we've all seen the close-up picture of the guy flat on his face on the carpet with the camera like this far from his face. We all feel like we have enough evidence to convict the guy. But based on the 9th commandment here in the United States, we have a belief that everyone ought to be considered innocent until proven guilty. So when the defendant, or when the defense attorney is helping select a jury in however many weeks or months it is that they finally get around to selecting the jury, he's going to talk to the assembled jury, and he will say to the jury, what do I have to do to convince you that my client is innocent? What does he have to do to convince the jury that his client is innocent? Zippo. His client is innocent until proven guilty. That's what our society is built on. So he doesn't have to do anything to convince them. They should all be willing to believe that the client is innocent already when we go to trial, and it is the prosecution's job to convince them that he is guilty. And so that's the way that we do it. And the reason that we do that is because of the proverb based on the 9th command, which says, everyone is believable when he's speaking for himself, but when his neighbor comes and cross-examines him, I'm paraphrasing obviously here, but when his neighbor comes and cross-examines him, a different truth emerges. And so we believe that because we are so prone to rushing to judgment. We've all made up our minds. We really don't know. What you actually saw in that video is a blur go running by the security and them all draw out their guns and start shooting. And then you have a picture of somebody face down on the carpet, and we're all being told that that's the same one. I don't think any of us could actually draw those connections on our own based on the blur that we saw go running through the security checkpoint and that end. We have to be so careful. And I'm choosing this one not because I think that the government is trying to pull something on us or anything like that. I'm just saying, in this day of heavy information that we have, we're constantly being told, here's the situation, what's your opinion? And oftentimes treated as though we are not doing our duty before God if we don't give our opinion about this controversial matter the moment that we hear it or within the first couple of hours that we hear it. And a week later, we might get very significant information that would have affected our opinion if we just had withheld it long enough to get the actual facts. When we rush to judgment on a situation without giving time to get the facts, we are violating the 9th commandment, and we need to keep that in mind. We need to go on, pray, and we'll be dismissed, and we'll come back to this next week. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you that you've given us these commands which affect all of life. These are not arbitrary. Yes, you could have boiled it down, and you did summarize these for us into 2 commands. And yes, you did expand them into over 600 commands. And even then, the applications need to be expanded beyond that and reapplied in the 21st century. But what you've done is you have shown that you are God over every facet of our lives. You've laid good and solid foundation stones for every aspect of society and every part of our worship of you. And we keep these in faith in a wise God. Yes, with some applications this side of the cross, but because we believe that there's a good God who is holy and is to be reverenced above all, but also is loving and has provided the right way to live. Help us to do that. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.